Good evening, everybody. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. So my name is Silvia Paracchini. I'm a reader at the University of St. Andrews. And together with my colleague, Michelle Luciano, I'm the founding co-chair of the Specific Learning Difficulties Network. I really want to tell you what was our motivation to set up this network. So really, this comes from our personal experience. I've been working in the field of dyslexia genetics for almost 20 years. And it's absolutely clear that if we want to make progress in understanding the neurobiology of dyslexia, but also in improving assessment and management plans, we need to work as part of large and interdisciplinary teams. We cannot make progress as individual research team. But also, it's absolutely necessary that when we do this huge, large-scale research, we do research that is actually useful. And what we don't want to do is to have our big project and they try to fit them in somewhere, but we want to engage with the key stakeholders from the beginning of the design of this research project. So really, our two motivations were coordinating research, but starting this dialogue with the stakeholders so that we could deliver impact where it matters. So the network was launched in November, and we were hosted here at the RSC. And it was 40 of us, and we had a great time, and we've been absolutely delighted by the reception and enthusiasm of researchers, clinicians, educators, charities, and policymakers. And as an highlight, for the very first time, we've been able to bring in the same room representative of the two cross-party groups from Holyrood and Westminster. This discussion also showed the importance of having a cross-nation approach, because some of these education and health are devolved, that might be good, but we also need coordination at bigger level. So we had great talks, great engagement. We've been lovely to each other, but something that we were determined to do is absolutely not leaving the room until we had plans on how to channel this enthusiasm and taking some of these ideas forward in a very pragmatic manner. So I'm going to pass you to Michelle now, who's going to tell you a little bit more of what we have set up to do. So Michelle.
Great, thanks Silvia. So I'm Dr Michelle Luciano. I'm a reader in psychology at the University of Edinburgh. And I'm going to briefly describe 5 of the working groups that were established as an outcome of this inaugural network launched last November. So just very briefly, the first working group is on setting research priorities. So here we're going to be generating research questions that aren't just important to scientists, but also to stakeholders and those with lived experience of specific learning difficulties. Our second working group is on improving education resources, and the main aim here is develop tools for teachers so that they can better identify children with dyslexia, dyscalculia as early as possible. And to this end, this afternoon, we had the working group leads facilitate a focus group with teachers and others from education to get some feedback on some early ideas for a resource in this area. The third working group is mapping available data cohorts, and this is involving looking through existing UK cohorts and even those worldwide that are accessible for data or information that's relevant to specific learning difficulties and can help us answer the questions we're interested in. It might be that there's insufficient data and that we need to seek funding to create new data cohorts that can answer these questions. So our fourth working group is on terminology. So here our members are mapping definitions that are currently in use, and they're looking at points of similarity and differences. And the long-term goal here is to agree on definitions that will be useful for research and for practice. And our final working group is on technology. So here we want to take advantage of developments in AI. So how can machine learning, multidimensional analysis, for instance, aid our research? And importantly, how can we help people make the most of technology? So these were 5 really important working groups and outcomes of our inaugural network meeting. But another equally important outcome was to hold a public engagement event. We want to raise the awareness of specific learning difficulties, and that's why you're all here today. So thank you for your interest. So in choosing a speaker for today's event, we decided to focus on dyscalculia. So charities like Dyslexia Scotland, the British Dyslexia Association have done a tremendous job in raising the awareness of dyslexia. But prominent scientists such as Professor Maggie Snowling here, who is part of our network, is urging schools to move beyond dyslexia. And just last week we see a news article highlighting the significant number of people who struggle with maths. So you're going to hear from Professor Brian Butterworth the most recent science about dyscalculia. So before we move on to Brian's talk, I'd like to thank Dr. Sinead Rhodes, who's going to be chairing the next session. So Sinead Rhodes is a senior research fellow in the Centre of Clinical Brain Sciences at the University of Edinburgh. She has an interest in understanding the cognitive factors underlying behaviour and learning, and she's going to be chairing the next session. So thank you, Sinead.
So it's really my great pleasure to introduce and chair this session and introduce you to our speaker, Professor Brian Butterworth. Brian is Emeritus Professor of Cognitive Neuropsychology at the Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience at University College London. As you've heard, he researches learning difficulties ranging from dyslexia, but also importantly to include Dyscalculia, which he's going to talk about this evening. And he's done this research in different education systems across the world. And indeed, in reflecting that, he holds professorial positions beyond UCL in Taiwan and at Melbourne University, where he's currently working on the neuroscience and the genetics of mathematical abilities and disabilities. He's led 2 European networks, Neuromath and Numbra, that promote multidisciplinary research on mathematical cognition. He founded the Centre for Educational Neuroscience, which has a particular focus on children with special educational needs. He is an advocate for people with learning difficulties and is really actively engaged also with policymakers. He's also a prolific writer and has published a number of books in this area, going back to his bestseller, The Mathematical Brain, in 1999. His most recent book covers the neuroscience of mathematical abilities and has the intriguing title, Can Fish Count? Tonight, Brian is going to talk about developments in the science of dyscalculia. And please join me to welcome Brian, our speaker tonight.
Right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. The Specific Learning Difficulties Network is a very important initiative. We don't have the equivalent in England. I wish we did. Maybe in the future we will. Okay, so I'm going to try and put recent developments in the science of dyscalculia into a context, the context that I talked about last year at the first meeting of this network. And when there's something new, it'll say development. Where it doesn't say development, this is stuff that's already been established. So, first point to make is that dyscalculia is important for individuals and nations. So the impact on individuals is considerable. It can reduce lifetime earnings by £114,000. That was in 2008. So you have to take into account inflation, and you'll see that it actually is quite a large number now, a larger number now. And it can reduce the probability of achieving 5 or more good GCSEs by 7 to 20%. Compare this with dyslexia, which can reduce lifetime earnings by £81,000, or it could in 2008, and reduce the probability of achieving 5 or more GCSEs by about 3 to 12%. This comes from a government report called Mental Capital and Wellbeing, and this was a really important report for a whole range of different topics in mental capital, in mental abilities, and mental disabilities. And that was initiated under a Labour government, and of course it's now been completely forgotten. So it's more of a handicap in the workplace than poor literacy, and men and women with poor numeracy have poorer educational prospects, earn less, and are more likely to be unemployed, in trouble with the law, and be sick, both mentally and physically. So the impact on nations. Okay, so the long-term costs of the lowest 6% in numeracy in England was £2.4 billion a year. This is back in 2010. This is a report commissioned by the government and carried out by the accountancy firm KPMG. Most of the cost was in lost direct and indirect taxes, so if dyscalculics are not earning as much, they're not going to be paying as much in taxes, either directly or indirectly. 6% will include some individuals who are not actually dyscalculic, just very bad, but most of them will be dyscalculic. So there's also costs for justice, because they're more likely to be in trouble with the law, medical costs because they're more likely to be ill, both physically and mentally. But the really shocking point to me, even back then, was that the amount of money that was spent on trying to help people with dyscalculia was just 10% of the total. I mean, there are figures there which are about special needs support for numeracy, both in primary and secondary schools, but beyond that, there was very little money spent actually trying to help people. Now, the second kind of impact on nations comes from an OECD report. And what they found was that if you could raise the lowest attaining 15-year-olds, that's those who are at or below level 1 in maths, to a PISA minimum level, that's level 2, this would increase GDP growth in the UK by nearly 0.5% a year, and that's actually quite a lot. Increasing standards in maths by 20 PISA points, which is a quarter of a standard deviation, would increase GDP to 2090 by about over $6 billion US dollars using PPP. And that, again, that's from a quite independent analysis. So dyscalculia is not just being bad on standardized maths tests. This is because there are lots of reasons for being bad on standardized maths tests. You might not have had appropriate instruction. You might lack motivation, might not like maths. You might lack appropriate nutrition. So you go to school hungry, you're not going to learn very much, and you're going to be bad on standardized maths tests. You might have general cognitive difficulties which impact on your ability to do standardized maths tests. And we know that spatial working memory is one of the cognitive factors that actually affects your ability to do arithmetic. Reasoning is not very good, you're not going to do so well. Literacy, you're not going to be able to read the books explaining what you should be doing in arithmetic. You may have attentional problems. But dyscalculia is about numbers and arithmetic and not about other branches of maths. So, for example, Emma King, we can find her online, who's a cosmologist, and so she's very good at advanced maths. but you give her a simple arithmetic problem like 9 plus 6, she's not so confident. And somebody that we tested, Paul Moorcraft, a historian and a journalist, he managed to get O-level maths. So those of you who are not old enough to know what O-level maths is, it's like GCSE. And he needed to get that if he wanted to go to university, and he did go to university. But he managed to pass that because in those days there was a lot of geometry in the curriculum, and he was okay at that. If you have no intuition of number magnitudes, that's the size of a set, how many objects there are in a set, which I'm going to refer to as number sense, then this will feel a bit like trying to do arithmetic with the alphabet. So you might like to try this rather than listening to me, which is, what letter is the sum of G and F? Okay, do it without translating into numbers, okay? Difficult. This means that dyscalculia is easy to distinguish from other courses of poor maths, even though it can present in different ways depending on other cognitive abilities and social circumstances, with tests of number sense. So number sense is simply the ability to recognize and represent in your mind the number of objects in a set. This can be done efficiently, accurately and speedily, or inefficiently, slow and or inaccurate. So one of the things that's happened since I was last speaking here is that some of the definitions involving number sense have changed. So back in 2001, the UK government had used this definition: dyscalculia is a condition that affects the ability to acquire arithmetical skills, have difficulty understanding simple number concepts, lack an intuitive grasp of number sense. ICD-11, that's the International Classification of Diseases, in the latest edition describes this particular condition as a significant persistent difficulties in learning academic skills related to mathematics or arithmetic, such as number sense. DSM-5, which is the psychiatrist's Bible, a persistent difficulty learning academic skills for at least 6 months, despite intervention targeting areas of difficulty in number sense, fact and calculation, and mathematical reasoning. Now, for those of you who do assessments of dyscalculia, you could regard just numeracy lessons as being the intervention, and if children are not responding to the numeracy lessons, this gives you at least a reason for testing their number sense. And the SASC, which is the SPLD Assessment Standards Committee, says dyscalculia is an SPLD whose core feature is a problem with number sense. And Scotland, which is ahead of the UK government in this respect, talks about a persistent inability to understand or retrieve numerical facts from memory, use of underdeveloped procedures and processes, and severity of difficulties with number sense. So I've been trying to find any UK government definition of dyscalculia, and I have finally found one. But you have to dig down into the Civil Service Disability Network's toolkit, which I've given here. It's a PDF for dyslexia and dyspraxia, but it does actually mention dyscalculia. And dyscalculia is to do with numbers. It makes it difficult to understand and work with numbers, perform calculations, remember facts in mathematics. There's nothing about causes or how to do diagnoses or how to do interventions, and nothing on workplace or even educational adjustments. And as I say, this applies only to the civil service. It doesn't apply to the rest of us. So let me give you some simple tests of number sense that depend very little on education. So the first test is dot enumeration with a vocal response. And this was used in the first study to link number sense with dyscalculia. So these were 9-year-olds with severe mathematical disabilities. They were 3 standard deviations worse than age group on timed arithmetic. They were also identified by teachers as having particular problems with learning arithmetic. They had normal or superior IQ. They had normal reading, language, and short-term memory. And we had a group of matched controls. We had a group with reading disabilities. And we wanted to know whether kids with reading disabilities are worse than controls on any of our number tasks. And there was a double deficit group. So does the additional deficit, reading difficulties as well as dyscalculia, make you worse than the single deficit dyscalculia group? So you may like to think about that for a moment. So it turns out that the dyscalculics and the double deficit group are significantly less accurate and slower on addition, subtraction, and multiplication than those with reading difficulties and the controls, who are the same. The dyscalculics and the double deficit group are slower on timed dot enumeration than those with reading difficulties and the controls. And there's no difference between dyscalculia and those with reading difficulties on any of the tests. So the double deficit doesn't make you worse. And those with reading difficulties were as controls on our number tests. So here's another way of testing number sense. This was done by Manuela Piazza, a former student of mine, where you have to select the panel with the most dots. And dyscalculic 10-year-olds are worse at selecting the panel with the larger numerosity when the proportional difference is small. So if they're close together, 9 versus 12, or as opposed to 9 versus 3. And there was another study here by Karen Landell, and she used a very similar method, and she found these are the controls, these are those with reading difficulties, those are the dyscalculics, and that's the double deficit group, and this is reaction time. So the reading difficulty group are just the same as the controls, but the dyscalculics and the double deficit group are significantly slower. And there's been a very recent study by De Carli in Marco Zorzi's lab in Padova, and he tested, or they tested, number sense at 12 months. So these are babies, really, and they found that the ability to discriminate numerosities at 12 months predicts math scores at 4 years. So it's something that's really congenital, really inherent in your condition, because if you're not very good at 12 months, you're still not going to be very good at 4 years. And another interesting study from Marco Zorzi's group, he used a maths to sample paradigm. So what the subject has to do here, the subject will see a number of dots and then has to pick out the same number from a choice of 3. And what he found was that dyscalculic learners are less accurate and are slower on this very simple task with either a large or small numerosities. I'm just going to tell you briefly about a study which I talked about before, which is using dot enumeration in kindergarten in Australia. It's a Melbourne study. So these poor kids were tested 7 times, 20 cognitive tests a time, from ages 5.5 when they were in kindergarten to age 11. And we did a number of additional tests like item timed calculation, which is very important educationally, and also an IQ test. And here we used a different statistical method from the ones that you often find in the literature. So instead of saying, well, the dyscalculics are the bottom 5% or the bottom 10%, the bottom 3.5%, what we said was, is there a cluster of individual kids who look different from the rest? So we used a statistical method called cluster analysis. And what we found were 3 clusters, which we've named slow, medium, and fast. And so this is in the slow group at 6 years up to 11 years. And what you may be able to see is that these kids are slower on all these ages from the medium group and the fast group. The slow group was about 7% of the total sample. Then we looked at what's called the subitizing range, the number of objects that somebody could accurately report up to about 4 items. So in the subitizing range, individuals are generally very fast and very accurate. So the slow group could only subitize 2 items. The medium group could subitize 3 items. And the fast group, even at the youngest age, could subitize 4 items, which is about the adult level. They all ended up being able to subitize 4, but in kindergarten, there were these significant differences. And the cluster at kindergarten predicts age-appropriate arithmetic to 10 years. So this is the slow group, this is the medium group, and this is the fast group. And you can see the fast group are much more accurate than the slow group. This is 2-digit arithmetic at 9.5. And again, the slow group are significantly less accurate on these tests than the other 2 groups are more or less the same now. And 3-digit arithmetic at 10 years, and the slow group is still miles behind. So, conclusion. There's a small cluster, as I said, about 7% in this sample, with poor ability to enumerate sets, that is, a core deficit in number sense. This core deficit persists from kindergarten to 11 years. It predicts who will and who will not have trouble learning arithmetic, at least to the age of 11 years. The implication of this study is that you should use this test in kindergarten or year 1 so that you know which children are likely to have difficulty. We also use a similar test in a very large-scale study in one district of Havana. We started with 11,500 children from 6 to 16, and we used randomized stratified sampling of tests they already did in school, because they do a standardized arithmetic test every year. And then we tested 2,000, nearly 2,000 individually. And one of the tests was item time dot enumeration. And here what the child had to do was on a keypad press, if it's 5 dots, press the digit 5. And the results were that the prevalence of dyscalculia, inefficient dot enumeration, and poor arithmetical fluency was 3.5%. The predictive value for the educationally relevant gold standard of arithmetical fluency, this is really what teachers and parents and children want to know about, because this is the educationally relevant task, was the sensitivity was 27%. That is, there are lots of other reasons for poor arithmetic, as I've said. The specificity, the true negative rate, was 98%. That is, few learners have a core deficit and good arithmetic. So if you've got a core deficit, you're in trouble. And the negative result was very good at reassuring that a child does not have dyscalculia. So the negative predictive value was 86%. So if you're okay on this very simple number sense test, you're very unlikely to have dyscalculia. Let me say something about the brain here. These are the areas in the brain that are specific to number sense, these 2 areas here. This is top view of the brain, and this is a slice down about there. And these two areas in the intraparietal sulcus, left and right, are part of the arithmetic network. And this arithmetic network is bilateral, that is, it's in both the right and left hemisphere. There's a slight developmental change, becomes more left dominant as you get older. And as you can see, there's, in these adults, you've got more areas in the brain in the left hemisphere. This is the left over here. And so these number sense areas are part of the arithmetic network. In dyscalculia, you find abnormalities in this area. So you find reduced grey matter. So these are the areas, again, these two little bits here. This is a study from a Swiss team who found reduced grey matter in children in the right hemisphere. This is the classic study by Elizabeth Isaacs, who found in adolescents reduced grey matter in the left intraparietal sulcus. And this is a study not yet published by my student Ashish Rampura. And it's exactly the same coordinates as Isaacs and the original study of number sense in the brain. There's a persistent reduction in grey matter in the IPS, looking at longitudinally over 4 years, or 2 samples over 4 years. So this difference persists in children, and there's also reduced white matter in the superior longitudinal fasciculus, which is the white matter, the axons that go from the parietal through to the frontal lobe. And you also get activation differences, so the relevant areas are not as active in dyscalculics as they are in normals. So one question that is important here is dyscalculia heritable? Well, we don't really know is the answer to this. If you look at twin studies, you find heritability estimates for dyslexia is about 40 to 50%. This is large-scale studies, but that's for dyslexia. For maths, but not for dyscalculia specifically, it's about 30% heritable. What I mean by 30% heritable, I mean that doesn't mean that for each individual dyscalculic, 30% of the problem is inherited. What it means is if you look at a lot of twins, 30% of the variance is looks as though it's due to heredity. It's also more common in boys than in girls. This is from the Havana study. There are also X-chromosome disorders, like, for example, in Turner syndrome. There have been several studies here, and I think every Turner syndrome female, these are just females, who so Turner syndrome females have one complete normal X chromosome, and the second X chromosome that they should have is either abnormal or missing, and it's not heritable because Turner females are infertile, but it's congenital, that is, you're born with it. And all the ones that have been properly tested are dyscalculic, or certainly all the ones that we've tested are dyscalculic. There's also a condition called Fragile X, which has been tested by an Italian group, and another X chromosome condition called Klinefelter syndrome, also by the same Italian group. But candidate genes for dyscalculia so far identified are not in the X chromosome. Insofar as we know where they are, they don't seem to be there. And insofar as it's been claimed, Silvia Paracchini and her group have found that study wasn't replicable. Practical diagnosis. So, as I said before, use simple number sense tests early. So a specific test for dyscalculia, not just for poor arithmetic, based on number sense. It must identify the core deficit in number sense using both time and accuracy. So it's the efficiency of the system, which is both, you must do it quickly as well as accurately. And we developed something called the Dyscalculia Screener 2003, which uses dot enumeration time, which we adjust for basic processing speed, because we want to know that the individual is slow on number tasks, not slow generally. This seems to be the only standardized Dyscalculia specific test that's easily available. There haven't been any more properly developed, and better tests should be developed, because this was done a long time, 20 years ago, and things have moved on a bit, and we need new tests that's standardized on different populations, also standardized on an English sample of kids. And so, must be taken used with care. We've also been working on interventions for dyscalculia, and we have certain intervention principles. So the key to understanding arithmetic are sets and operations on sets, i.e. number sense. So this will come as no surprise for primary school teachers. Therefore, the key to supporting dyscalculic learners in schoolwork is linking sets to the familiar symbols, counting words and digits. And this can be done in two ways. Guidance for teachers, especially teachers of dyscalculic learners, with manipulables. So using manipulables as long as they're needed. Don't just get rid of them at the end of year one. Keep using them for those who need them. And we've published a book saying how teachers should use manipulables, and digital games. So I'm going to talk a bit about digital games in a moment. And both ways of approaching the problem should follow the standard pedagogical prescriptions, build new tasks on what has been learned, adapt each task to be just challenging enough, and construct solutions to be able to enable learners to compare their actions in relation to the goal. This is prediction error learning. So no multiple choice questions, that just encourages guessing. So we're very keen on this constructionist approach. So I'll just show you one of the games that we've developed. It's called Number Beads, and it involves constructing and deconstructing sets. So here what you have to do is you have to construct that target, and you can do it in two ways. You can split a set. These you will recognize as Cuisenaire colors, or that's the split it, or you can join them together to make the target. Then you get a little reward. And the teacher could set how many correct versions you need in order to get onto the next level, or we could set it. You then progress from this arrangement to an arrangement where each set is accompanied by the appropriate digit. So here you've got a 3 and a 3, keeping the same colours, so if you join those together, you'll make a target. But the next level, we get rid of the colours, and this may encourage counting the beads, which is fine, but you have to rely on that rather than the colours in order to make the solution. And then the final level, this part of the game, is where you've got digits alone, and you can click on the digits and it will split into two parts to make the target. So a very simple game, no bells and whistles. You have to construct the answers. Everything on the screen is relevant to the task in hand. So there's no irrelevancies, there's no other numbers around, no birds tweeting or music playing. And this enables the child not to be distracted from the task you want them to do. And we've done a number of effectiveness studies. So there are lots and lots and lots and lots of maths games on the web. And the question is, are they any good? And the answer is, we don't know, because they've never been properly tested. Here we've done proper tests. I'm not saying this is the only game you should use, but I'm saying that this is a game that's had proper testing. So this is a study by my former student Ines Boni in a small sample in London, and what you see here are the errors. This is the Dyscalculia using number beads. There were only 8 of them in this sample, and the number of errors went down significantly. This is typical learners, and here they didn't use number beads, and their errors went up. And there's a Dyscalculia control group, just had normal teaching. There were only 3 of them, fortunately, and there the number of errors went up a lot. We don't really know why. The next study we did was done in Italy, and this is a much larger study. We used this game played at home, so the parents were instructed how to set the game up, and that's it. And we had typically attaining and also low attaining using the standard Italian test for kids of this age, called the ACMT. And we just took the lowest 15%. So they won't all be dyscalculics, but a lot of them will be. And basically what we found was that the children improved a lot with the number beads game, and we had a number control game called Number Choice, where you didn't have to construct the answer, just had to, it was just multiple choice. They improved a bit, it has to be said, but not nearly as much. And the low attainers improved more than the typical children. Now, since then, we've had a large study in Singapore. So we've been working with the National Institute of Education in Singapore and also with the Ministry of Education in Singapore. And they did a very large study, and they did, the ministry did a very large study, and they did it without any help from me. This is the score on the ministry's standard test for kids of this age, years 1 and 2. And they worked on the game for 5 weekly sessions of 60 minutes. This is what happened after they played the game for 60 minutes, 5 times, once a week. Enormous improvement in the scores. I don't know if you can see the scores along the bottom. 15 is the maximum. And a lot of them were scoring 15, but the whole population shifted to the right. And this is the size of the improvement. In this large study, kids playing the game did much better. You can try it yourself. Here's the link. You won't get the data. You have to be in the study to get the data. But you can play the game, or you can give it to your children to play the game, and they enjoy it. So very briefly, something about policy. So we need more studies, in particular longitudinal studies, genetic studies. We know there's a genetic component, but we don't know the genes involved. Can dyscalculic learners be identified in infancy? And this could mean fewer years of pointless suffering, as well as earlier intervention. We've seen that there's some evidence for tests at 12 months for kids who are going to have trouble later. We need better recognition by educational authorities and governments, leading to support for dyscalculic sufferers. We need awareness by parents and teachers, training for professionals, that is teachers, educational psychologists. And we need policymakers to make policy. So official recognition should involve an official definition. For example, Scotland's definition will do, at least for the moment. and requirement for special support for sufferers. This should be part of government policy. And in the USA and in Italy, there is laws that require it. We need funding for more ways of doing assessment, more methods of intervention properly evaluated, special training for teachers and educational psychologists, and funding for further research. So there's what I've called a virtuous triangle. So policy depends a bit on what science shows, recognition depends on what science shows and what policy actually spells out, and of course all of these things work in a coordinated way. So conclusions very briefly. Dyscalculia, where we are, a deficit in number sense, the core capacity to process the numerosity of sets, the basis of arithmetical learning. And it's easy to identify and distinguish dyscalculia from other causes of poor arithmetic using simple time tests of numerosity processing. The neural basis of dyscalculia is revealed in abnormalities in numerosity processing parts of the brain. The developmental dyscalculia is currently the poor relation of dyslexia with a much lower public profile, but the consequences of dyscalculia are at least as severe as those for dyslexia. Where we need to be, we need good, cheap or free, properly standardized, easy to use screener. So my screener is not free and it's not cheap, though it is quite easy to use, but we need it. We need a better screener. I mean, that's all you've got at the moment, but we need something better. You need effective, specific interventions based on the core deficit in number sense and the best adaptive pedagogy. Appropriate EdTech can help here, so like in our digital game, that's a way in which EdTech might help. We need training for teachers and educational psychologists. They don't always know about dyscalculia. In my experience, not many of them do know about dyscalculia. And recognition by policymakers and educational authorities worldwide. So thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, so we're going to have some time for questions, but I'd just first like to introduce you to our panel. Actually, I'm going to get them to introduce themselves. So we'll start at the end with Frances Foreman from Education Scotland.
Good evening, sorry. I'm normally Fran. Feels like Frances is my Sunday name. I'm from Education Scotland. I'm a senior education officer and I have national policy lead for inclusion and additional support needs, and I also chair the Addressing Dyslexia toolkit, and I instigated and led on the development of the Dyscalculia definition.
Okay, and next, yeah, Kate. Okay.
So firstly, thank you for inviting us along today. We're both delighted to be here. So my name's Rachel Miller, I'm 21 years old, and I'm currently studying primary teaching at the University of Glasgow. I was identified as being dyslexic at the age of 8, and I'm a young ambassador for Dyslexia Scotland.
Hello, my name is Kate. I'm 17 years old and I've just finished S6 and I'm going to study product design engineering at the University of Glasgow. I was identified with dyslexia when I was 7 years old and I'm also a young ambassador for Dyslexia Scotland.
I found aspects of early primary school quite challenging, such as sequencing and decoding. My parents were aware of signs of dyslexia, however at school I was managing really well, so therefore the teachers didn't feel I was dyslexic. However, my parents took me for a dyslexia test and I was identified as being dyslexic.
I presented very differently from Rachel and I became aware that I was not as quick to complete tasks as my friends were. Again, my teachers felt that I was not dyslexic and because I was achieving academically, but a private dyslexia test showed I too was dyslexic. All children with dyslexia are different and present with different needs. Greater research and education into neurodiversity will enable a greater understanding and early identification, which in turn will allow more children with neurodiversities to succeed.
Both Kate and I are very positive about our dyslexia, and although there are some challenges, we feel there are so many more advantages. Our dyslexia has presented different challenges throughout our schooling, however, with the correct strategies, we have been able to succeed. At times, getting strategies implemented into the classroom was difficult, and we found that the difficulties usually arise when there was limited knowledge from the teacher. Education of neurodiversity to teachers at the university level is so important to allow student teachers like myself to be aware of the signs and strategies to allow us to work collaboratively to enable children to reach their full potential.
As a child with dyslexia, you need one person behind you, and one of the things that was beneficial was that our parents educated themselves in dyslexia and the strategies that can be helpful in the classroom and at home. My dad already had some insight as he too is dyslexic. It is also important that the child, parents and school work together to allow the child to succeed. Dyslexia never affected any of our friendships, and I do believe that our dyslexia has allowed us to have good communication skills, compassion and understanding for others.
Dyslexia has made us resilient and confident, and as we became older, we were able to express in the classroom the strategies we needed to allow us to succeed. As we progressed to National 5, Hires and Advanced Hires, it was really important that we knew the arrangements that were available for children with additional support needs. Call Scotland and Dyslexia Scotland have been a super resource for both of us. We have used technology throughout our whole schooling, and that has been a key to enabling us to succeed. As I transitioned to university, I was allocated a named person from the Disability Service I was able to provide me with the correct support and the resources.
Dyslexia has meant that we have had to work harder to achieve, but we have always believed in ourselves, had the backing of our family, and always knew that with the correct strategies in place, there were no barriers to achieving academic success. Dyslexia has made us determined, confident, have good communication skills, and the ability to think outside of the box. In today's world, we need people who think differently, and dyslexics are so good at this. Dyslexic people are creative and show initiative. They have good leadership skills and are innovative. They are excellent problem solvers and have enhanced interpersonal skills. Rachel and I love being dyslexic. Our dyslexia has provided us with wonderful opportunities and a skill set that will enable us to succeed in today's world.
Events like this are so important, and as the more we do these events, the more we can understand about neurodiversity, the more we can educate and empower, and that will ultimately lead to success in our globalised world. Thank you.
Such a powerful account. Thank you very much. That's brilliant. Now, I'm just going to open up questions to the floor. There's roving mics, I think. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
I have a question about the definition of dyscalculia. I saw from your slides that sometimes in some of your paper you define dyscalculia 2 standard deviations below the average score of the score of the control group, and some of the studies use 3 standard deviations. So I wondered how what's the criteria for using 2 standard deviations or 3 standard deviations? And some studies in dyslexia, they use 1.5 standard deviations below the normal reading score, or minus 1.25 of dyslexia. And secondly, I wonder whether you define dyscalculia as a problem of calculation problem, or it's a general math problem. It means that if you only use the calculation as a measurement for dyscalculia, or a general math score including all kinds of math tests.
Well, just to go to the statistical point, well, ideally we'd always use cluster analysis, but sometimes we can't. And the 2 standard deviations on a number sense test seems to me to be entirely reasonable, because that sort of gets you close to where it would be on the best prevalent studies. They're about 2 standard deviations worse than the sample. And it's not really about, so your second question was, about maths. Yeah, it's not about maths. It's just about numbers and arithmetic. And I've met distinguished geometers who, well, I asked them, I said, tell me, this famous geometer at an Ivy League university, I won't reveal his name, I said, and that was a fascinating talk about geometry, David, what's 8 times 7? Oh, that's trivial. I said, yeah, but what is 8 times 7? And he either wouldn't or couldn't answer that question. But he was a very good geometer, and as I mentioned, there are other people who are good at other branches of mathematics. The problem is, if you're dyscalculic, it's very unlikely that you're going to get to be able to do the kinds of mathematics that you could be good at.
I've actually got a question for Fran. So, because we've heard a lot about dyscalculia, of course, this evening. So Fran's from Education Scotland. And I'm just wondering, you know, we've heard about it as being as impactful on children as dyslexia. And just from an Education Scotland point of view, yeah, just love to hear your sort of thoughts on that and how it's being considered.
Well, when we first published the Addressing Dyslexia Toolkit in 2010, quite quickly we were getting people contacting us to ask about dyscalculia. And as the years went on, we had more and more inquiries, and we didn't have anything really to help to say, and so we were kind of saying, well, you know, you should still be taking an holistic, child-centred approach to assessment, as we should be doing again in Scotland. And it's not just about a standardised assessment, but we didn't really have any standardised assessments per se, apart from obviously Professor Butterworth's. So we were very acutely aware of this, and a couple of years ago, I was involved in the definition of dyslexia in Scotland. It was quite a journey. But I thought we need to do something about this for dyscalculia. It was a much smoother process than I had ever anticipated. So we worked on that for about just under a year. I had a fantastic group of people, far more knowledgeable. I'm exceptionally not great at number sense, even though I'm a techie teacher. I really struggled with that. So the core group, they've gone on to develop professional learning that's freely available on the Education Scotland website. They've worked really, really collaboratively together. I'm not particularly involved in it. So we are very supportive of trying to help practitioners across Scotland. Everything's freely available, so actually anybody can access it. And we're having a conversation last week about what are we going to do in the next academic year, because a number of the colleagues that we're working with, you know, they are practitioners, they're teachers in various different roles, so they're going to stop, you know, for the summer. So it's very much a co-produced, collaborative approach. But like all areas of additional support needs, we can always do more. But I would say, lastly, that what we really try to promote is inclusive practice. I feel we're quite lucky in sort of the world of dyslexia, because we are fairly comfortable to be able to say that those approaches and those pedagogical approaches that will support dyslexic learners will also support many other learners. You often hear that being said by other stakeholder groups, but I think with dyslexia it's particularly, it's a very good analogy to have. I am significantly dyslexic. My 3 children are as well. We're all different. We're not exceptional. What I meant was we're exceptionally different. We've all got different strengths. My son's a geophysicist. Not bragging, absolutely not bragging. You don't want to be asking him to remind you to do anything. But it's that co-occurrence. We're really focusing on inclusive practice and helping people understand that actually everybody's very different. And to teach your class, to support your school community, we need to really have understanding and acceptance of that.
Thank you. Have we any other questions from the floor? I've got a few more for the panel, but I'll just, yeah.
A lot of the data that was presented around PISA scores seemed to focus on countries that are already in the top quartile. do we see the same conclusions drawn out in cohorts that are generally lower achieving?
If you use criteria like the bottom 5%, the bottom 5% in Singapore, where I work, will be very different from the bottom 5% in Peru, where I don't work. If you just look at those criteria, they're very different, and that's due to a whole range of social and educational issues. I've been working, as I mentioned, in Singapore, and the reason I'm working in Singapore is because although they score at the top or near the top in things like the PISA rankings or TIMSS, they don't know what to do about dyscalculics, and that's why they came to us. And the way in which they teach maths works very well for 95% of their kids, so they do excellently. But the bottom 5% are not treated well, at least until now, when they have access to some of the games that we've been providing them with. So what PISA tells you is that math scores on the whole depend so much upon where you happen to be born. And if you happen to be born in Peru, yeah, bad luck. If you happen to be born in Singapore, you'll do much better. And if you happen to be born in England, well, you're okay, but could do better.
Lots of hands. Yeah, I think I saw your hand first, and then we'll come here.
Thank you. You were talking mostly about the importance of early intervention and the role of that in stimulating the number sense and promoting basic numeracy. Is this something which also recurs as a feature later in development, or is this, as you said, the higher maths might be quite accessible because it doesn't involve number sense? Is it something where the nudge onto a faster trajectory early on is sufficient to obviate the effects of dyscalculia, or is it something that continues to need attention throughout school?
Well, one of the problems is that we don't have longitudinal studies of intervention. So please, governments, give me loads of money to do a long, a 10-year intervention study. So we don't know what happens if you intervene early. But if you can assess early, and you can say, well, this kid is not going to do very well on arithmetic. So let's find some other aspects of mathematics that he might do well on, and let's try and help him do that, or her do that. So I think early assessment is really important.
Sorry, this lady here.
Thank you, and thank you, Professor Butterworth. That was really fascinating. I'm a parent. I'm not a practitioner. My daughter is dyscalculic. But I would like to ask the young ambassadors, what advice would you give my 13-year-old?
Your 13-year-old is dyscalculic? Yes. Right, well, the first thing, you think you think it's dyscalculic. So the first thing to do is get a proper assessment.
She's been properly assessed.
She has been properly assessed,
she has.
Okay. And the assessment is she's dyscalculic.
She's very clearly dyscalculic.
Okay, so I'd make 2 points. One is, use something like my game, and I've given you a link to it, and she might enjoy just getting a better feel for numbers. We don't know if this will have a long-term curative effect. We just don't know. And the other thing is you should, try and find, as I was saying before, that aspects of maths that don't depend on numbers. I mean, there's lots of geometry and dynamics where you can be really good. I mean, I was going to say, with the case of Emma King, she's terrifically good at really advanced mathematics. I'm not saying you should leap into that, but I mean that might be something where your daughter might be able indeed to excel.
Thank you very much. Could I direct that to the 2 young ambassadors?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so what I would say is obviously like dyslexia and dyscalculia are 2 different things, but probably one of the main things that would be a message for both is trying to get like the correct strategies, the correct resources like in place, so that then hopefully like school life is easier for your daughter, and that would allow her to achieve and hopefully then succeed and go on to do whatever she wants to do. So that would be my key message, to take away from it?
Yeah, I would just say just continue to have their back, like you obviously do, and you're here today, and just try and find out as much as you can about it, and then just keep going all the time. Don't, you know, just stick with it until they have everything in place to allow them to succeed. Yeah. Thank you.
Any more questions? I notice we're sort of up at time. Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah, I did notice your hand. Yeah.
Hi, this is for the two ambassadors. If you hadn't used technology to help you with your dyslexia, how different do you think things would be for you now?
I think it'd be very different.
Yeah.
I think technology has been like such a key part of our journeys, like going through school. And I was obviously 8 when I was identified, so I was in P4, and straight away from P4 I've used technology then all throughout school, primary, secondary, and then into university. So I think if you didn't have technology, you really would struggle. Just like your basics with like your spell check, like typing, like all your S's and things, and then using that in your digital exam papers and your exams made such a difference. And like we'd write golds, we used that all throughout, and it was a great resource.
Yeah.
So I think technology is like massive, and I think technology coming through is just going to get bigger and better and just support dyslexics even more.
Great. I think we're going to have to wrap up, but thanks very much. It's great to end on such a positive note from the ambassadors. Thanks very much, everyone, for coming. There's a reception now back upstairs.